Hello everyone, Noah the Consequence here with episode 9 of my Keep on the Borderlands Adventure Module playthrough series. And here is the player character roster. We have 6 player characters being run by 6 different people. Where we left off last time, the characters used a lull in fighting the hobgoblins and goblins to gather back up and do what healing they still could. However, they noticed that the monsters lingering in the room to the west had all disappeared. This caused the characters to worry that their opponents were relocating and were about to launch a surprise attack from a new direction. The characters decided they weren't going to wait around and let the monsters attack at their leisure. So they decided to go back into the adjacent room and try to find out what they were up to. The oil fire was now beginning to burn low, so I told the players that their characters could jump over it. However, they still needed to make a dex check to land on their feet on the other side. So they all lined up and began making the check to enter the room gracefully. Girhan the dwarf failed his dex check and face-planted when he jumped over the fire and into the room. Which actually turned out to be fortunate for him, because the goblins hadn't actually left the room after all. They had merely moved into the darkness in the back half of the room. The goblin crossbowmen fired a volley at the characters, but I do not now remember if any hits were scored. However, if any characters were hit, Girhan definitely wasn't one of them. Corstein the Fighter moved to engage the front-right goblins, while the other characters told Killian the Thief and Iggy the Mage to hold off jumping into the room. However, Iggy was carrying the party's only light source, which meant the characters in the room could not see the full extent of the threat. So the Sunflute took out a torch and lit it off the oil fire in the doorway. The Sunflute then moved up with the torch to illuminate the room, while Girhan joined Torstein in fighting the goblins. Iggy and Killian now joined the other characters, although Iggy too failed his dex check and tripped after jumping into the room. The characters realized that the Goblin tribe chieftain was part of this group, and moved to take him out as well. Apparently his fear of the hobgoblins was greater than his fear of the characters. The goblins were finally eliminated, but now the characters could hear movement and shouts coming from the east again. It turns out they were right in guessing that the hobgoblins were repositioning for a renewed attack from a different direction. However, because the characters didn't just stand around and wait, it meant that the hobgoblins couldn't arrive before the goblins had been defeated. So, instead of once again being attacked from 2 directions at once, the characters were able to face each threat one at a time. By now, though, only the Hobgoblin chieftain himself and a couple of warriors were left to fight the characters. The tribe's females followed behind, but did not actually engage in combat. In this screenshot, Torstein the Fighter has scored a critical hit on the Hobgoblin chieftain, with devastating results. Once he went down, the females turned and fled, never to be seen again. The characters now re-entered the room where they had just defeated the Goblin chieftain and his warriors. They realized that the monsters had all been entering this space through a set of secret doors in the western wall. Everything was dark and quiet, but the characters advanced cautiously anyway. The characters now entered a confusing array of rooms which appeared to be hobgoblin living quarters. None of these were fancy enough to be the chieftain's private chamber, but the characters were certain it must be nearby. Finally, the characters located a room large and opulent enough to be the chieftain's private quarters. Killian the Thief immediately began investigating an iron chest in the corner of the room, which was found to contain the Hobgoblin tribe's wealth. The other characters tossed the room, but found nothing else of value. The characters then thought there might be a secret door concealed somewhere in this room, so they began searching random sections of walls. No secret doors were found, but when Girhan the dwarf kicked aside a pile of firewood, he discovered a magic wand concealed amongst the kindling. Exploring a hallway north of the chieftain's quarters, the characters found another activated secret door at the end of a side corridor. The secret door led to a large storeroom. The characters did a thorough search of the place, but it was found to contain only mundane foodstuffs. There was also an open corridor leading off to the east. The characters exited the storeroom and began following the corridor, which now turned south. Up ahead, the characters could now see what looked to be another communal dining area. They began to suspect that by following the most recent secret door, they had actually crossed over into a new monster lair, separate from the Hobgoblins. Based on the smaller than average size of the furniture, they concluded that this was probably the Goblin tribe's lair. Passing through the dining area, the characters also saw several small bed mats lining the chamber's walls. However, the place was quiet and appeared to be deserted. Continuing on, the characters arrived at an opening leading back out to the surface. There was no question now that they were in a different monster lair from the one they had entered by. Once they were back outside and could get their bearings, the characters realized that this was the entrance to the Goblin lair. This was the very first monster tribe they had battled against when they first arrived at the Caves of Chaos, but they had not returned here since that day. Off to the west, the characters could see the way by which they had entered the Hobgoblin lair earlier in the day when they bashed down the door. But in between the two, there was a natural cave opening, which the characters had ignored up until now. So they decided that this was as good a time as any to investigate. As soon as the characters entered the cave, they detected a foul body odor stench. It immediately reminded Torstein of his recent fight with the ogre, and he speculated that this was probably the monster's lair. The place turned out to be a small two-chambered cave and was no doubt the ogre's lair. In the outer chamber, a huge bearskin served as the monster's bed, and a pile of gnawed bones lay in a corner. The inner chamber held a large burlap sack stuffed with several smaller sacks. A couple contained food and drink, including a small keg of brandy, but the rest were filled with coins of various types. There were also some probable magic arrows, plus a couple of potion bottles and a scroll case. There was so much coin that Iggy was once again called upon to cast his floating disc spell to carry it all. The characters also discovered a poorly concealed secret door, which opened back into the Goblin lair. The characters then decided to return to the keep for the night. By now, the guards had become accustomed to seeing them approaching the gate at around sunset, loaded down with loot from the day's adventure at the Caves of Chaos. Before heading to the inn, the Sunflute stopped by the Sage to drop off the latest finds, which were suspected to be magic items. As usual, the Sage said he would need a day or so to identify everything. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. If you can, please leave a comment and let me know what you think. If you have not yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. And anything you can do to help support the channel, I appreciate it. Thanks again. Bye for now.